Hello everyone, let us learn about CSS. So what is CSS exactly? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets and it is used to design your website. With HTML, your page would look like this. But with CSS, you can improve the looks, the color, the typography, size, and animation of a website. Before we start getting into CSS, let us see the developer tools which will help us in analyzing the CSS of an HTML element. To start the developer tools, press Ctrl Shift plus I or F12 after opening a browser. When you do that, you will be able to see a screen like this. After you see the screen, click on the Elements tab. Inside the Elements tab, you will be able to see your entire HTML code. Choose the element inside the HTML code which you want to analyze. After you have chosen the element, you can see all the CSS or the styles which has been applied to that element. You can even manipulate the CSS from this developer tool. So this developer tool will help you analyze your CSS and manipulate it as well. Moving on, let us start understanding the CSS syntax and terminology. In CSS, a selector is a code snippet used to identify the web page element or elements that are to be affected by the styles. A property is the aspect of the element that is to be affected. For example, color, padding, margin, background, etc. A value in CSS is used to define a property. For example, the property color might be given the value of red like this. So color red. I know this is very confusing. So let us start understanding this with an example. So your general CSS code would look like this. Over here, your h1, which is the h1 tag, is the selector. This selector chooses the h1 element and all h1 elements will have the following styles. Next, there is the color. The color is the property over here and we can define a value of this color which will be applied to the h1 selector. Over here the property is color and the corresponding value is green. So all h1 tags will have the text color to be green. They will have the font size to be 3em, which is a metric to define font, and all the text will be aligned in the center, which is defined in the line 3, where we set text align center. So this is how you write your CSS code. If you notice, your CSS code must be inside the style tags. So style tag is used to define your CSS code. So let us see the different ways in which we can add CSS to our HTML. One way is to directly apply inline CSS. This is an example of inline CSS. Over here, we have the h1 tag. It has the content, a blue heading. Now, we want to make this heading a blue color. To do that, we use the style attribute. In the h1 opening tag, we put the attribute style, with an equal to sign, and we put double quotes. Inside the double quotes, we first specify the property and then a colon, and after the colon, we specify the value. This approach is called applying inline CSS because wherever the element is present, we are applying the CSS on the same line. Next, there is another way to apply CSS, which is by applying the style to all the tags. We just saw an example of this. To apply the same color to all h1 tags present in your web page, you can use the following code. Over here, you may notice that your tag must be the style tag, inside which you put the selector h1, then the corresponding property and the value. You can have multiple property and values as well. There is one more method by which you can apply CSS to your HTML page. That is by using external classes. So let's say you have an HTML file inside which you can see the first important line is inside the head, where using this syntax we import a CSS file. So let's say we have a styles.css file in the same directory as our HTML file. To import that, you use the following syntax. The link specifies that we want to import something which is outside our HTML code. Inside rel, we define the type of the link, which is style sheet. So whenever you are trying to import CSS, you should in the rel attribute specify style sheet. In href, you define the link of your CSS file. In this way, you can import any CSS file which is kept outside your HTML file. Once you do that, you can access the classes from the CSS file. So let us first understand what a class is. Earlier, we saw that by using a selector over here, like the body or the h1, we can apply the same styling to all the elements. But usually, we don't want all the header elements to look alike. We want some control over individual elements as well. To do that, we use classes. A CSS class begins with a dot or a full stop. After that, we specify the class name. Inside the class name, we specify the corresponding properties and their values. This is how we define a CSS class. Once we have defined this class, we can use this class in different elements. To use this class, you need to use the class attribute. So over here, you can see that we have the p tag. Inside the p tag, we use the class attribute inside which we put the class name. You may notice that we have not added the dot before my CSS. So the dot is just used to specify that this is your class, but while using the class, you don't need to specify the dot. If you do this, your paragraph will have the background color as red. You can use the same class on different elements. So you can use the my CSS class on the body or the p tag or any other elements which you have in your HTML file. So this is another method of how to apply CSS. You can apply CSS using ID. When using the ID, you have to use the hashtag. So let's have a look at this code. Over here, we have the style tag. Inside the style tag, we have defined hash nav, the corresponding property and the value. When we want to use this design, inside the element, we specify the attribute, and inside the attribute ID, we specify the name nav. When you learn about JavaScript, you will know that you can use ID to select each element and manipulate it. By using the ID to specify the style, you can change the ID of different elements and have the corresponding style automatically applied to it. If this is not clear, I believe it will be much clearer after you are done with your JavaScript session. So let us run all of the code which we saw earlier on a browser and understand how CSS works. So let us start understanding CSS by writing our own code. First, we need to create a basic HTML file. To do that, right-click on your file explorer, go to New and choose a text document. Over here, let's name the text document Learning CSS and change the extension from txt to HTML. If you get the warning, choose Yes. To open your HTML code in the browser, just double-click, and to open it in code, you can choose your favorite editor, go to Open With, and then I will be using Visual Studio Code. Yeah. Over here, let's write the very basic HTML code. So there is the doc type HTML, then HTML tag, then head. Inside head, let's put the title Learning CSS. Then we have the body. Inside body, let's have a h1 tag. This is my header. Let's save this. Now, to see our website, just refresh it and you can see we get this is my header. What we want to do now is apply some styling over this header. The first way to apply such styling is to use inline styling. So in h1, add the attribute style equal to and then two double quotes. Over here, let's first center this text. To do that, you can see we are already getting a lot of suggestions of possible CSS properties. The correct property to use to center the text is to use text align. So I'll choose the text align and you can see I'm getting the possible values as well. So let's choose center. When you save it and refresh the web page, you can see that your header is now center aligned. You can add multiple styles by using the semicolon. Just put a semicolon and then a space, and then you can start defining further properties. Let's change the color to red. So let's use COLOR red. Let's save this and refresh. You can see now our header is red. You can keep on adding multiple properties and their values in a single line to style your h1 tag. After inline styling, let's have a look at using the style element to style all h1 tags. So in our head element, let's define the style element. Inside this style element, to make all our headers center aligned, first we need to specify the selector, which is h1. Then we use the curly braces and we need to specify the property and the values. So let's take the text align center from here and put text align right. Also, let's change the color to be blue. Also, let's remove the current inline styling we have applied over here. So now we have a header and we have put the style to this h1 tag to have text align right and color to be blue. Let's save this and refresh our web page. You can see now the text is right aligned and has the color blue. Let's say if we had multiple header elements. So let's rename it. This is my header 1, my header 2, and my header 3. If we save this and reload the page, you can see we got the 3 headers and all of them are right aligned. This is because the selector we chose is h1 and all h1 elements now will be right aligned as well as they will have the color blue. So this might not be desirable. Let's say we want the first header to be left aligned, the second header to be center aligned, and the third header to be right aligned. How do we do that? We can do that using inline styling, but there is another method. So let's see how to do that. So let's create a CSS class named first. Over here, we set text align to be left. Let's copy this and define our second class, which has text align center. And then we have the third class, which has text align right. So now we have 3 classes, first, second, and third. Let's remove this h1 for now. So let's save this and refresh. So you can see now the headers are displayed as the default styling. We want h2 to be centered and header 3 to be right aligned. To do that, we need to use the class attribute. So let's put class over here, then an equal to sign and 2 double quotes. Over here, you can put first. Similarly, I'll copy this and put the class second and third. Let's save this and refresh this page. Now you can see that the header 1 is left aligned, header 2 is center aligned, and header 3 is right aligned. So this is how you use classes. The points to note are the classes must be defined in the style element. Next, you must begin a class with the full stop or the dot. After you define the class, to use it, put a class attribute in your element and then put the name of the class. You can have multiple classes as well. Let's see how to do that. We create a red class which will have the color red. Let's say we want to make our header one to be red. So after the first class has been defined, put a space and type red. Save it, reload, and you can see our header one is now red as well. So this is another method in which you can use classes in CSS to style your elements. Next, let's use an ID to style your element. So we'll remove this class from the third header and we'll put a ID equal to header 3. We want this header 3 ID to be styled differently. So we'll put a hash header 3 and let's put the background color of this header to be red. Let's save this and refresh. So you can see now our header 3, which is the ID for the third header, has been put the background color red by using the hash. So when you want to style a specific ID, put a hash, the ID name, then the property and the values. And then you can use the ID attribute to specify the ID name. This is another method to apply CSS. There is one more method in which if you, let's say, have a very long website, then your styles will get very long. It might take up 1,000 or more lines to write down all your styles, and this makes the code very messy. So a better way would be to put this style in a different file. Let's see how to do that. So this is where my HTML code is present. I will put a CSS file just beside it. So I'll create a text document. Let's name this my CSS and change the extension to CSS. Choose yes and let's open it in VS Code. Over here, I will put all of these classes just as it is and save this CSS file. Now I can remove this style element. Instead, I can use the link element to import the CSS which is present over here. Let's see how to do that. First, we put the link, then a rel equal to, you can see I'm already getting a suggestion. So I put this, and inside href, I need to specify the name of my file, which is my css.css. And then I close it. So when I save it and refresh this page, you can see that there is no change, even though we don't have the style element over here. That's because all of the styles present in my css.css are being imported. If we comment this element and refresh our web page, you can see all of the styles are removed. So this is another method in which you can put your CSS code in one file and import it using the link element. Over here, the rel refers to the style sheet, which is CSS, and href specifies the path to the CSS file. So these are the ways in which you can put styling to your HTML code. Now that we are familiar with how CSS works, let's move forward. So when should we use classes and IDs? Use IDs when the elements only appear once on a web page. Because IDs are unique, you can use the ID to specify in JavaScript to manipulate the corresponding elements. When to use classes? When there are multiple elements on a single web page on which you want to apply the same style. So let's say there's a p tag, there's a span tag, and there's a div tag. You want all of them to have text align center. Then you should use a class. Now that we know how to use CSS, let's have a look at some commonly used CSS attributes. So on the left hand side of the table, there are the CSS properties, and on the right hand side, there are the possible CSS values. You don't need to remember all of these property and values, as any good text editor would give you all the suggestions. So the first one is text align, which is used to center text as well as images inside your container. So a container can be another element inside which you have your text or your image. You can use the text align property with the values left, center, and right. As it's self-explanatory that when you align left, your text will be left aligned. When you use center, it will be center aligned, and when you use right, it will be right aligned. Next, there is the color. This color is used to specify the color of your text. You can use the values blue, red, green, yellow, or you can use hex codes as well. Hex codes are used to specify the RGB values of your color. Then there is the background color. Unlike the color, which is used to specify the text color, the background color property is used to specify the color of the background. It takes all the same values as the color property. Now let's have a look at font size. Font size sets the size of your text. You can specify your font size in terms of the number of pixels. Then there is the width, which is used to specify the width of the element, the height, which is used to specify the height of the element. There is the line height, which is used to specify how much height your line should take. It's different from font size, as line height will leave some gap to ensure that the line height is met. You can specify the width, height, and line height in terms of pixels. Next, there is the text decoration, which is used to decorate a text. You can decorate the text with underline, and there are many other properties as well. Or you can put it forcibly none, because there are some HTML elements which automatically have some CSS applied over it, like the A tag. So to remove the underline in a A tag, you need to set text decoration to be none. Next, there is the font weight, which can have values bold and normal, which changes the width of your font. Next, we have the font family, which will change your how the typography of your font looks. So these are the commonly used font families: Arial, Geneva, Verdana, and so on. Next, there is the border, which can be specified in pixels, and it can set the border of your HTML element. Then there is the margin and the padding. Margin is used to specify the, the distance between the element and your own element. So if there are two elements, once let's say it's on the top and another is on the bottom, and you want to specify some distance between these two elements, you use margin. to do so. The margin is an external property. So the distance is applied outside the elements. The padding acts very similar to margin, but padding is an inside property, so the height of the element would increase when you use padding. But when you use margin, the height is not increased, but the element just goes down. We will understand margin and padding more clearly when we are looking at Bootstrap. So, margin and padding, as they are distance metrics, they can be specified in pixels. These are the commonly used CSS properties and their values, but you do not need to remember them. When you are using VS Code, you will get all of these suggestions and you can use Google to search about it and use them accordingly. So this is the summary of what can CSS do. CSS can be used to turn an HTML document into a professional, polished design. You can use CSS to create a flexible grid for designing fully responsive websites that render beautifully on a device. You can style everything from typography to tables to forms and much more. Position elements on a web page relative to one another using properties such as float, position, overflow, flex, and box sizing. You can add background images to any element. Further, you can create shapes, interactions, and animations. So CSS is very powerful, and as you keep on using it, you will get more and more familiar and come to understand its power. Let us learn about Bootstrap. So what is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is a free front-end framework which includes CSS and JS-based responsive design templates. It helps us create professional-looking website very fast. So there were some guys who put in a lot of effort to create some CSS classes and JS-based functions. Now we can reuse their CSS classes by importing the Bootstrap library. This will save us a lot of time because we do not need to recreate the same CSS classes. So why should we use Bootstrap? So first, it is very easy to use and it will help you create very good designs in a very short period of time. The second most important feature of Bootstrap is that it is responsive. By responsive, we mean that even if you view the web page in a browser on your PC or you use it on your mobile phone, Bootstrap will ensure that it looks good. Bootstrap is written to be compatible with all browsers. It may happen sometimes that you write a CSS code which works on one browser, let's say Chrome, but fails completely on another browser, let's say Internet Explorer. Bootstrap ensures that their classes are compatible across all browsers. And as I already mentioned, using Bootstrap will save a lot of your time because you do not need to rewrite the same code which has been written by everyone. So how do we add Bootstrap library in our code? As you can see, this is the starter template which has the Bootstrap library already imported. How do we import the Bootstrap library? We go to the website www.bootstrapcdn.com. Next, we copy the links which are already present over there for the CSS library and then we paste it over here. Next, we import the Bootstrap JavaScript link and we place them inside the body. So this is how we import Bootstrap. As you can see, Bootstrap is imported using link. Similar to the way we imported our own CSS file, Bootstrap is also imported. The only difference is that the href is on a URL. So this link is pointing to the Bootstrap CDN where the Bootstrap library is present. Similarly, to import JavaScript, we use the script tag. The script tag has the source attribute which we use to point to where the JavaScript library is kept. You might be wondering what integrity exactly is. So, when we fetch the file, it might get corrupted. To check whether the file is correct or not, we do a hash function on it. A hash function, if you do not know, will generate a unique ID of the entire file. This ID is what is given in the integrity. By comparing the ID, we can make sure that our file is not corrupted. This is also very good for security because let's say the Bootstrap CDN website is compromised. Then some unethical person might put some malicious code in the Bootstrap library. Now, everyone who is using the Bootstrap CDN will have the malicious code, and your credit card information, your debit card information might be stolen by such a unethical person. Having integrity will ensure that even if there is a slight change in the code, your Bootstrap library won't be imported. Let us see in detail how to go to the Bootstrap CDN website and copy the CSS and JS code. So when you go to the bootstrapcdn.com website, you will be able to see this page. Over there, you can click on the CSS drop down and you will be able to see three different varieties of link present. Choose the HTML version, and once you click on the HTML link, you will be able to copy it. It is automatically copied, and then you can paste it in your HTML file. Put the CSS code in the head. Pay attention, guys, this is very important. Put the CSS code in the head, but put the JS code in the body, at the end of the body. This is very important because CSS should load before the website starts loading, and JS should load after the website has loaded. Because JS uses ID, and before an element is initialized, it does not have an ID. Hence, if you import the JS files in the head, then it will give an error that an ID does not exist. So just keep in mind that JS libraries should be opened at the end of the body and CSS libraries should be in the head. Now that we know how to import Bootstrap library, let's, so you can similarly for JS, go to the website, choose the JavaScript tag, and then in HTML, copy the code to import the JavaScript links. So now that we know how to import the Bootstrap link, let's see what Bootstrap provides us. So Bootstrap provides us with containers. Containers is a class which provides a responsive fixed width container. Container fluid provides a full width container spanning the entire width of the viewport. As you can see below, first there is the container which has some padding on the right hand side as well as the left hand side. but container fluid will take up the entire width of the screen. So if you put an element inside container, it will start after some padding. Whereas if you put something in container fluid, it will start from the very beginning of the window. So this class, which is .container, is provided by Bootstrap. Let's have a look at some other useful classes. So the first is the .p class. The .p over here, P stands for padding. What we mean by padding, let's have a look at it. So as you can see, we have a text button over here. If we add some padding to our text, it will look like this. So if we add a padding of left to our text, then it will look as shown on the screen. Now let's see how our button will look when we add a margin to it. So we have this text, and when we add a margin of left to this text, you will see that there is a left gap present, but it does not have the orange background. So it means that padding adds some inner width to the text. When you use padding left, an inner extra space is added to the text. But when you are using margin, an outer space is added to the text, hence you do not see the orange background. There are many other classes. So to use the padding left, you use PL, which is written over here. It means that P stands for padding and L stands for left. Similarly, ML would stand for margin left. P stands for padding, M stands for margin, L stands for left, R stands for right, T stands for top, B stands for bottom, Y stands for the Y axis, which is top and bottom, and X stands for the left and the right. So, by a combination of these characters, which is P, M, then T, B, R, and L, you can specify the different kinds of padding. To specify the different measures of padding, let's say you want to add a very large padding, you need to specify PL-phi. So if you use PL-phi, you will get a very large padding. But if you want to use a small padding, you can use PL1. So this is how you control the amount of padding which you want to apply. Next, there is the button. So dot button and button primary together will create a button which has a blue background and has rounded corners as shown in the figure. There are many other button types possible, and we'll have a look at them in the later sections. So this is it regarding padding and margin. These are very important as they will be used very frequently when creating a website. Next, let's have a look at some predefined background colors in Bootstrap. In Bootstrap, primary means the blue color. So if you apply the class bg primary, then you will get the background color to be blue. If you use bg secondary, then you will get the gray color. Success stands for green color and danger is red color. Similarly, there are other background classes as well. You can use them to design your website. So if you want to have a button which has a green color, you use .btn dash success. That button will have the green color and will allow you to create a button which a user will press when there is a success. So if you have a yes, then you can use this button success. If you have a no, which is dangerous, then you can have bg danger. Let's have a look at some typography classes provided by Bootstrap. So these are the classes: font weight bold, which will make your text bold. Then there is font italic, which will make your text italic. There is text left, which indicates that your text should be left aligned. There is the text center, which indicates that your text should be center aligned. You don't need to remember all of these. As you keep on using and seeing them in some code, you will get familiar with them. Next, let's understand the grid system of Bootstrap. This, I believe, is the most important feature of Bootstrap, and this is what makes Bootstrap responsive. Bootstrap assumes that your entire screen has been divided into 12 equal sections, and you can create grids in your 12 divided columns. So you can choose how much space your content should take by controlling the Bootstrap process. Let's see how to write the code to create the grid system shown over here. So this is the entire code to create this Bootstrap grid. Let's analyze this line by line. So first of all, we have the div class container. All the grid systems in Bootstrap must be put inside a div class equal to container or container fluid. Once you have put the div class equal to container, we want to create the first row. So you need to put div class equal to row, which will tell Bootstrap that you want to create a new row. Inside the row, we use div class equal to call md12. What this means is that Bootstrap will create a column of medium size which has the width 12. So as the grid is divided into 12 equal columns, we are taking up all the columns. Hence, all the width of the website will be taken up using this div. And we will have the entire screen for this column. Do not concern yourself with what MD means over here. We'll learn about what MD means in the next slide. So now that we can create this row, let's have a look how the second row is created. So we again have div class equal to row, but over here, instead of using call md12, which would have taken the entire width of the screen, we use to call md6. So this is the first column, which has a width of 6 out of 12, which means half. So the half of the width of the screen is taken by this class, and the other half is taken by the other div. So that is why we see two columns, each having a width of 6 out of the 12 grids divided by Bootstrap. To create the third row, similarly, we use call md4. Now, as 4 by 12 is equal to 1 by 3, we take 1/3 of the column when we use call md4. As we have 3 of them, we see 3 columns, each of them taking 1/3 of the screen. Next, we have four columns, colMD3, colMD3, and so on. ColMD3 is used for defining 1 by 4 of your screen. So each of these columns take up 1/4 of the screen width. And similarly, we have column D1, which will take 1/12 of the screen. If you use 12 of them, you will be able to see columns, each of them taking one width of the 12 imaginary grids divided by Bootstrap. So this is how you create a Bootstrap grid. You can have inside a column multiple rows as well, and inside each row you can have multiple columns as well. So you can have multiple grids inside each grid and create as much complex structure as you want to. So this is it regarding understanding the grid system. Now let us understand what exactly the MD means. If you remember, I said that Bootstrap is very responsive, and the main reason is that we use Bootstrap grids. Bootstrap is responsive because it ensures that once the screen size is beyond a certain point, two columns are converted into rows. So multiple columns would come down below one another and create a row so that your website is responsive. The way to do this is using these classes. As you saw earlier, we used colMD class to define our grid. MD stands for medium, and for devices which have screen width greater than 768 pixels, the columns will behave normally. But if your device size is less than 768, then these columns would come down one below the other and be converted into a row. Similarly, there is SM, which stands for small, XS, which stands for extra small, LG, which stands for large, and XL, which stands for extra large. Each of these have a corresponding pixel mapping. So XL corresponds to 1200 pixel, LG 992, medium 768, small 576, and XS less than 576. So when should we use call XS and when should we use call SM? On very small devices, in portrait mobile phones, the pixels is less than 576. So if you are targeting such a device, you should use call XS. But if you are targeting your mobile, which is in the landscape mode, then you should use call SM. If you are targeting a tablet or a medium device, then you should use call MD. Sometimes some small laptops also have the screen size which is similar to a tablet. Hence small laptops would also come in call MD. Then there are laptops which have a bigger screen width and they come under call LG. Then there are desktop PCs and televisions which come under call XL. So if you use these call SM, call MD, your grid system will be very responsive and your entire website will look nice on different devices. So that's it for Bootstrap. You do not need to concern yourself with remembering all these classes. With time and practice, you will start remembering these classes.